Welcome back to the Man Cave, everybody, for another episode of the ManTFup podcast. I'm Kimmy B.
And Lenny.
And before we go any further, please remember, like, subscribe, share, and follow, and get ready to drop your comments below any of the clips or the full video as you watch. We love to hear from you. Now, if you watch the podcast, or even if this is the first episode you're ever seeing, one of the things we love to talk about is education, the state of it here in the good old US of A. And then also, interesting things we see from around the world that could possibly be implemented or, things that we see that we do better. Today's podcast is inspired by a clip I, of course, saw on Instagram. It's of children that are clearly in an Asian school, and it must be an in-between break period, and the teacher is getting them going with some exercises. It looks like they're kind of like dancing. It's like just the arm movements from a TikTok dance. But A, it was entertaining to watch. B, these kids look like they're having a blast. You'll see the clip. And C, all I can think of is, what a great way to energize or reinvigorate young minds, old minds. I think we've all learned this. If you've ever gone to a seminar or any sort of, event where you're sitting for a prolonged period of time, if the people on the stage are any good at what they do, they will encourage you at some point to stand up, stretch, move around, right? Like, kind of get engaged, get the blood flow going, all of those things. It helps you focus, wakes you up. And so I clearly can see the benefits of doing this in a classroom. Lenny, I sent you the clip. What were your initial takeaways?
I thought it was great. Kids have a lot of energy. Being able to expend some of that energy during class to then refocus on what you need to learn. Yeah. I think it's great.
I mean, these kids were like, they were going ham. It's clearly something that they do on a consistent basis and probably in the same sequence because they knew exactly what move was coming next. They looked like they were synchronized swimmers. Like they were all, in tune and in sync. So it's obviously a consistent part of their daily academic routine. If you do any sort of research on, education abroad, especially in Asian countries, they're very big on movement. They're very big on synchronicity. They're very big on doing things as a collective, as far as, warm-ups, stretching. I know in a lot of Japanese schools, they actually start their day off that way. And, it's got to be working because they're leading the pack in math, in science, in a lot of different fields. And I just actually saw some really disturbing information. I didn't realize that the American education system, which for so long was at, again, the top of the board, lags behind 31 other nations, I want to say, in math. And we lag behind 16 other nations in science. And children from, Asian countries, schools tend to have higher standardized testing scores than their Western counterparts, which was actually the, not the inspo, but the catalyst for a major Supreme Court ruling, right? If you think about it, that was the whole issue that overturned affirmative action in this country. And it was led by, kind of an Asian student coalition that was like, listen, we outperform everybody and we are being discriminated against for it, or in favor of other people that don't perform as well.
What's happening in this country is on us. It's on us.
Yeah.
The lack of education, the lack of emphasis on childhood health and education. It's all on us. It's all on us.
I mean, we were sitting here before we started this podcast, and I think that there's so many different kind of facets that all come back to education, whether it's at an adult level, whether it's at a youthful level, when it's health and the correlation, like between the two, like health, education success, mental wellness, all of these things. Watching these kids made me happy, but the comments disturbed me. The first one literally was like, I'm appalled that there's 56 students and one teacher. And then, of course, I was like, okay, well, first of all, we definitely, I'm sure, have schools in this country that have got very high
60 students in a class.
Yeah, student to teacher ratios. But I was just like, do you see the level of discipline and focus of these 56 students? And I was grateful I wasn't alone, because a lot of the comments were pointing out exactly that. They were like, ma'am, you'd be amazed when you teach structure and discipline, how easy it is to educate people, right? When these kids know that they came here to do
You could have 100 kids in a classroom if they're all sitting there paying attention.
Yeah. And the other big takeaway, a lot of the comments obviously pointing out, dictatorship, they're being, trained to be good little worker bees. And the irony of that is at the base of a lot of conversations about our own education system, is that all they're doing is turning out people that can pull levers and press buttons and will follow.
I get that look, especially in the communist countries, but Japan's not really a communist country.
Mm-hmm.
And Japan has,
discipline,
structure. It's, these are the things that are getting abused in this country on, epic levels because of so-called freedom.
Mm-hmm.
But it's kids need structure. If you don't have structure in a kid's life, they're lost because they don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's I think it's important to point out, like, when you look up differences between the American and Chinese education system in particular, one of the big things is, Chinese education focuses on strictness and precision, which of course improves retention. American education focuses on improving student assuredness, self-determination, and independence, which aids in comprehensive thinking. Obviously, folks from a lot of Asian countries don't think that our math is necessarily on par with theirs, or obviously many other countries in the world, and that's been proven, as far as test taking and the way that we perform here. But there's nothing wrong with discipline. I would love to see a model, I think, where we take the best of both worlds, right? And then the other point that a lot of folks were making was, look around that classroom, you don't see one obese child.
Yeah, it's the facts. It's the coddling of children, and nobody wants in this country. Not nobody, but people in this country don't want a smart population. There's this. I think there's this worker bee thing that you're thinking of in this country where, we don't want them to be smarter than the job they're going to do, mm-hmm. which is not really benefiting us at this time. Anybody can turn a wrench. That's fine motor,
mm-hmm.
But that person needs to be able to have thoughts and processes.
Yeah, but you can okay, but and not to minimize what anybody does. Like, when you're building homes and bridges, clearly some people are just following the orders of the architects, of the engineers, right? Mm-hmm. But it would still behoove you to understand,
absolutely,
when building these things, why you're doing what you're doing. And I think great architects and great engineers, A, take the time to explain, and B, want their team to understand it. It's like, imagine if the people who were building that Boeing jet understood that if you don't put the bolts back in the door, it might just fly off midair. You know what I'm saying? Like, that to me is part of that conversation, like understanding the whys of why you do something. And it's how people end up moving forward and becoming even more than what they set out to do. We talked about it in the episode, I think, where we were discussing, the massive shortage in manual labor in this country and what happened to vocational schools and why is that not a priority. We're always going to need people to shore up infrastructure, mm-hmm. and to build homes and to fix pipes and all of these things.
Part of that was the big tech boom in the 90s where, everybody started moving into computer sciences and, building circuit boards. And, a lot of that a lot of that manufacturing of products went away from this country. I mean, I was talking to somebody the other day. I mean, being a machinist back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, you made $100,000 a year if you were a good machinist. You barely see them anymore. You barely see these creative people, with the advent of rapid prototyping and all of this stuff. But the general thing in this country with school is they're just not teaching our kids. It's a shame, but the kids are getting set on, this is your target goal in 3rd grade, and this is your target goal in 6th grade, and this is your target goal in 9th grade, and that's all we're going to learn. No critical thinking, no problem solving, just, here's the book. These are what you're going to be tested on when you get to here. Let's focus on that.
And that's all still a part of test taking for higher education. Like if you have to take your ACT, if you have to take your SAT, which I know they're trying to phase out at this point, I think they'll find something to replace whatever that.
Yeah, they've already.
That looks like. Well, no, they're taking.
University of Miami doesn't require you to.
I know, but I'm saying I think they'll find something to replace with. Right now, they're going off of whatever your GPA is, your extracurriculars, your obviously letters of recommendation, the essay that you write for entrance. I think that they'll find something else. But we've discussed ad nauseum the fact that people learn differently and people test differently. And I would have loved in college, at least at the higher levels of education, to have been offered the option of like an oral exam. Like, let me sit here and tell you exactly what I've learned instead of filling up 4 blue books that I promise you probably didn't read, right, with an essay question. Because I think that's a great testament to whether or not you took anything away from this class, whether you were present or not. Did you read the material? Best way to figure that one out is to have a conversation with me about the material, right? As opposed to sitting down and saying, hey, you have this amount of time, to structure 3 essays about these things.
I think a big difference between other countries and our country is the core learning of the children. It's the preschool learning of these children to have the time to pay the attention to the structure before they get to school. Because right now, when kids don't go to lower education school, they go straight into kindergarten. So you don't have to go to anything prior to kindergarten. So if you have a kindergartner that was at home with whoever running amok and has no structure in his life at all for the first 5 years versus a child who, had a schedule. This is when we eat breakfast. This is when we go down for a nap. This is when we do this. Going into kindergarten, you now have 2 different children going into kindergarten with 2 different. You have to basically start from scratch to make the one kid sit.
Yeah. But guess what? To your point, when you're comparing American schools to Asian schools is like comparing U.S. culture to Asian culture. It is apples and oranges. So what you just said, while very, very true, is such an American way to look at things because the discipline that these kids experience in school spills out far beyond the 4 walls of that classroom. The discipline that these kids experience is in every facet of their life. Let's be very clear about that.
No,
Japanese culture, same way. Chinese culture, same way. In many cultures, actually, outside of the U.S., discipline, respect, structure are fundamental parts of what they do. And while I love the fact that we,
can be independent.
That we breed independent. That's what we're, again, free thinking and entrepreneurship and all of these things. It doesn't mean that you don't need those other qualities and characteristics. Like, to me, it's one of the reasons why people don't want to go into the military, right? Like why Americans, especially, generations post World War II and really post Vietnam are like, they're not going to tell me what to do and let them get in my face. And that's a part of everyday life.
Listen, we've discussed many times how kids are sponges from age 1 to 3.
Mm-hmm.
4 and 5 still continuing to learn, educate. I mean, respect, discipline, and manners should be in that first 3 years automatically. Every American.
But you just acknowledge the fact that is not the case.
No, absolutely. But,
especially in this country.
But every American should want that. It's not, do they not know how to teach their children to eat? Do they not know how to teach their children to hold a fork? It's the level of independence has gone beyond, oh, my kid could eat with his hands till he's 5 years old. Listen, it's there. It's out there. So when you take that level of independence and you put it across the board, everybody's got a different theory on it.
I get that, but so again, you can't. Where do you draw the hard line in the sand? Like, so I'm watching this video and I'm seeing these kids, and we're acknowledging the fact that structure, discipline, all of this respect for authority is a part of that culture, right? You've clearly stated that you have kids out here that are going to walk into kindergarten. I've had this conversation with teachers, not potty trained, and expect the kindergarten teacher to teach their child how to go to the bathroom, right? I don't know that that's the job of a kindergarten teacher. I don't know that that's. So this is my point, Len. Is that when as a community do we man the fuck up and demand more from the people who choose to bring children into this world? Because you don't get to say raise my kid and then with the other hand go, you don't have the right to raise my kid. And that's the unfortunate part of where we're at in 2024. We expect our schools to create the next Bezos, Musk, Washington, whomever, right? And yet on the flip side of it, the minute they speak to your child with an authoritative tone, the minute they tell your child,
my child that way, only I can.
You know what I'm saying? Like, all of a sudden now they have no authority. You don't respect them as another adult. And this is what your children are seeing.
Yes. So we have a lot of parents in this country who either don't know how to discipline their children or raise their children in their first few years to where they're actually respectful young people. Mm-hmm. And then we've also taken the authority out of the school system to discipline our kids and make them sit in that chair and make them do this stuff. And, listen, I don't think any kid wants to just sit down and be forced to do something that they don't have any interest in. Mm-hmm. But in some cases, it's necessary to get to that next step. I mean, you just mentioned to me before the podcast about Broward County schools, mm-hmm. right? About how they're considering closing 5 schools because
they're underpopulated.
They're underpopulated.
And we need affordable housing.
How about we just restructure the Broward County school system since we have 60,000 empty school seats? How about we just open it up to 2 levels of pre-K? Why don't we bring kids in at 3?
Yeah.
Why don't we try and curve this system instead of just shutting down a school and turning it into affordable housing or what will become.
Here's the deal, and you saying that to me, obviously, if you watch the podcast or don't, I don't have children, but education was something that was highly valued in my family. That's disturbing that you say there's a lot of kids that don't enter school until kindergarten because, again, my mom was basically a single mother, and while I had babysitters or places where she could take me, she chose to put me into, pre-K very early. I went to Montessori school, which is clearly, if you know anything about Montessori school, but it can be expensive. Again, something she sacrificed for because she wanted me to have access to that. And Montessori, their approach is very holistic, but also all encompassing. They do, educational things, and then they also teach etiquette and they do cultural projects and things like that at a very early age. It's all part of their, education model. But her whole thing was, I was born in Florida, and because of where my birthday fell, I was either going to have to kind of repeat pre-K, or she had to put me in a Christian school. She put me in a private school because they would allow me to start early. So I started when I was 4. But I was reading at 3.5, 4 years old. And I say that to double down on what you were just, talking about. Your brain is the most open, like you said, from 1 to 3. That's when when your vocabulary is being formed. Basically, you're just absorbing everything. It's why teaching children languages early is so much easier. You can teach your kid multiple languages, as they're learning to speak English, and they'll likely retain it. But that makes me so sad, because it's no wonder that education is getting farther and farther away from the average everyday American, because if they're not learning to read at a young age, if they're not engaged in educational activities, if their brains aren't being utilized in these ways
and structured, it's structure.
Yeah. You're regimented. You're getting up at a certain time. You're going. Structure. You have naps. You have lunchtime at a certain. I get it. But
and it doesn't have to be the same structure for every child, but the principle of structure needs to be taught.
Yeah.
I'm not saying every kid has to get up at 5, 6, 7, 8. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
As long as when they get up, here's my breakfast. Here's here's what I'm going to do here. Here's what I'm going to do here.
Would you be opposed to parents, especially in the public school system, parents being held accountable for their engagement with their children outside of school? I feel like that's a place where we definitely fall short. And I understand that we have people who are working 2 and 3 jobs. I get all of these things.
That's a serious gray.
I don't mean it's legally, but at a lot of private schools, you're required to be at a certain amount of school events. You're required to do classroom time with your kids. Yeah. In order to maintain your enrollment, the parents have to be actively involved.
I'll tell you this. Do I believe that parents should mandatorily have to communicate with their teacher, with their child's teacher? Yes, I believe that should be important. I don't think the kid should be penalized if the parent doesn't.
Yeah.
And what are you going to do to penalize?
But wouldn't it be nice to create a culture that where parents actually
are involved,
wanted to be engaged? And I'm not talking about, because there's clearly parents who are very engaged. We know this. I'm not trying to take away from them, but I'm talking about where it was, again, culturally a part of our society. It was just something that was valued, as it is in many other countries around the world. Again, when we had the conversation about affirmative action, I think the biggest takeaway for me was, aside from discriminatory policy and however you feel about that, let's look at the Asian community in this nation. What are they doing different than the most of us, than many others as a collective that has their kids excelling in this way, right? And part of that is the value that they place as a culture, as a community on education.
It's respect.
But it's also that their parents are actively engaged. They're looking at their homework books. If they get it, you think that there are these kids that are making it to Harvard and to Yale and to all these schools. To your point, you think these parents didn't know their teachers?
No,
you think
but
these parents weren't aware?
But Kimmy, again, if you teach a child respect at a young age, okay, that child is less likely to want to disappoint
100%
his parents. So, which allows the parents to be less, they don't have to be as connected because they trust that their child is doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And, if something happens, I believe the teacher should send the parent, and the parent should step in and take care of whatever the problem is. But that level of respect in the beginning, I chose to go to my children's parent-teacher conferences. All of them, every one of them. I missed 2 in my 3 children's school career.
Yeah.
I chose to do that. I didn't need to go. Do you know why? Because they tell me, hey, your son's a great student. Your daughter's a great student.
Yeah.
It's like, I want to go hear the hurrahs, but I don't need to, because my children were taught at a very young age that you need to do this, you need to do this. They had the structure. They had the equipment to be successful in school. And that, I think, is part of what's lacking. And so if you're not going to prepare your children for a system that is clearly like a job, because that's what it is. That's a child's job, is to go to school 7 or 8 hours a day and do well. If you're not going to prepare them for that job, and then you're going to strip their management of any powers
to manage,
yeah, what do you think you're going to end up with? You're going to end up with teenagers who beat the shit out of their teachers.
Yeah.
That's what you're going to end up with.
Over a phone. I feel like the more we have these conversations, the more it comes back to accountability on all levels. Like when we talk about it, I say that because,
yes,
Lenny, it's changed.
It's absolutely.
What this means to me has changed over the 2 years we've been sitting on this couch. I think when I came in.
What do you mean I'm getting to you?
No.
No.
Is
that what it sounded like?
No.
Let's make a clip of that, please.
No, I'm
exactly
self-aware.
What it sounded like.
And I look at things because we have these conversations and I have to like smash my head against the wall talking to you. And then I leave and I continue to think about things. And then also the comments that we get from you guys that watch and that, you that follow us on social media, and just getting a different perspective, whether I agree with it or not, it's always eye-opening. But like I said, like looking at the comments under this clip of these young children, right? Like wilding out in unison and understanding as people comment, like this is great for them. You don't understand the blood flow. The point is, with so many of the things that when I first started doing the ManTFup podcast with you, I would have wanted to place the blame somewhere else. I would have wanted to say, what is the government doing? What are the leaders of these schools doing? At the end of the day, you really do have autonomy, right? As a parent, you choose how you raise your child. You choose how engaged you are in your child's life. You choose if reading is going to be a priority in your household. You choose if health and nutrition is going to be a priority in your household. You choose if education is going to be a priority in your household. You choose if excellence is going to be something you want, not only you, and part of that choosing it is also showing it and actively being those things.
I mean, it's got
yourself.
It's got to be an active change across the board. And it's funny, you look at that and I think back to when I was in elementary school, right? When I was in elementary school and we were in PE, we were all doing jumping jacks and all in.
Yep.
We looked like a choreographed team.
Yeah. Or like an ROTC or whatever.
Yeah. So between the fact that now you have 2 working parents or one parent working double time, and the education system itself being, I don't know, driven into the ground and stripped of its power, that combination, somebody has to step in for that median ground. Like I said about, why don't we have pre-K, 2 pre-Ks in public school? If you're concerned about this, but it also goes to the fact that if you have disrespectful parents, you're going to have disrespectful kids, or the parent has to step up and change. You can look at, abusive parents and, maybe alcoholic parents. The way you raise your child and your child's choice as an adult. So maybe the parents now had an abusive parent, which caused them to be abusive. It's their choice now to change that because they're adults. They don't have to perpetuate that, because you could have 3 generations of disrespectful parents or non-caring parents.
And I hate to say the irony of that is that oftentimes children who are in abusive households or are dealing with parents who have addiction issues are actually the most respectful and
Yeah.
aware, because they're walking on eggshells, right? Like, and you never know what could set somebody off. So, and then children who have disengaged parents are oftentimes the ones that act out because they're looking for attention.
Yes.
It's not necessarily that they're bad. It's just they're not feeling seen
Yes.
at home. And it doesn't even have to be because the parent doesn't care. To your point, it could be 2 jobs. It could be financial,
horrible, I was a horrible student. Horrible. I was just a horrible student. I didn't care. And I made a choice as an adult to not.
Have you thought about why you didn't care, though?
My kids didn't, of course.
You're not going to get into that.
Years of therapy. No.
Tell us.
I chose not to. I mean, my kids didn't even know my school history until they were old enough to understand it. Until they were at least 12 or 13 years old. They didn't know, that I was a bad student or I had a rough thing.
Or that you dropped out?
Yeah, they didn't know any of it until I was,
But that's because you placed a value on, such a high value on education. Yeah.
On changing. Yeah. And it's not even on education, Kimmy. It's
well, it is in the sense of you prioritize education for them in your house, and then later explain to them why it was.
Yes,
and
I also
prioritize.
I also prioritize them being respectful and being able to have a conversation with someone, and and have an open mind that the person sitting across from you has a totally different thought process than you, and you will never find someone that has the same. So, you have to take that into consideration if you're going to, deal with people.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the most disheartening part of our conversations about education on this podcast for me is the fact that, there was a time when our public education in particular was, like we said, when we started this, at the top of the board, 60s and 70s, right? We're going to the moon. We've got NASA. We're doing all these incredible things. We've got the most brilliant minds. And we still are a country with the most brilliant minds. Like, let's be very clear. Now, some of those minds have come from other places, but that's part of what America is. So I'm not going to take away from any of the things that we do, that our people create, any of it. But I think sometimes when you're at the top, and this seems to be pervasive of a lot of areas of our culture and our country, when you're at the top, right, and you start to rest on your laurels, I think any great coach, any great entrepreneur, any great general will tell you complacency is the beginning of failure, right? I feel like we got very complacent when you're used to being number one. So you've had this slow erosion, even though it hasn't really been that slow in the grand scheme of time. It's been pretty quick, right?
50 years.
Yeah. Like you go from being at the top to being not even middle of the pack. Like we're talking about 31 countries.
And not just in education.
Oh, no.
Health, it's like everything.
Mortality. Like, no. It's wild. It's wild. But it's like we weren't paying attention because we were the best, right? Like, and then all of a sudden you wake up, and that's where this narrative comes from. And it's like, to the people like you and I who are sitting on this couch, and to many others that have been banging the drum, like trying to get people to wake up. You know what I mean? It's like, guys, it reminds me of like the civil rights activists or anybody who's been fighting for change in this country. It's like they've been sounding the bell, and nobody is, because if it doesn't hit you, if it doesn't impact you personally, directly, then it's like it's not happening.
Yeah, but in the meantime, I think the whole entire country right now is getting hit personally.
Yeah, our infrastructure is crumbling, our economy is flailing,
and
our education system is failing.
Being the best, the best in the 60s and 70s, is a semi-illusion. Because I'll give you a story. Did NASA develop this wire that could only be seen under a microscope in the late 60s? Right? Could only see it under a microscope. It was like the biggest thing ever. And they sent it to Japan to show off. And Japan sent it back. They drilled a hole in it. So it's, it's always, technology's always been going. And a lot of this country's technological breakthroughs were from people all around the world
Of
coming to
course.
this country.
Of
And
course.
our space program is, thanks to Germans.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have it without them.
Yeah.
And it was,
But that's why I said, like, that's the brilliance of America. And at the higher levels, we still have the best higher education in the world. The brightest minds from around the world come here
to go to MIT
to be educated. The problem is that Americans as a whole can't get in. And I don't, and obviously we do, so please don't take what I'm saying out of context. But, to Lenny's point and to many of the conversations that have been had on this podcast, education is a priority, and we've gotten to this place where people are comfortable saying, but yeah, how can you expect people to care about education when they can't keep their and it's like, it's cyclical, guys.
Yeah.
Why can't you keep your lights on? Because you can't get a job because your education like, you know what I'm saying? It goes in a circle. And it's like, if we can't remove ourselves at some point and go, okay, well, guess what? The buck stops here. Like I told Lenny, this article came out. They're going to close some schools in Broward County. There's a school board meeting happening around the filming of this podcast. I said, how many people from the community do you think are actually going to go to that school board meeting and put up a fight and say, don't close our schools, or give them another suggestion like, hey, why don't we increase the access to pre-K, right? Why don't we do this? Because you're right, actually, when I think about it now, you need a lot of people need vouchers for pre-K because it's basically daycare.
Free VPK is not at our public school system.
Yeah.
It's paid for
it's
at these little,
mom and pop
places that you don't know what they're getting taught in there.
Yeah.
Everyone's different.
So there's no real structure to it.
No, there's no structure to it.
And there's no, I don't think there's any requirements as far as their educators either. No. Correct, right?
Well, I mean, it's somewhat. I mean, they have to,
but it's like a certification.
Yeah,
and like
they don't have to have a
not,
master's in
teaching.
teaching.
It's not like,
I don't even know that they have to have a degree in teaching.
But the point is, people will wake up in 6 months or by the end of the year, and their neighborhood school will be closing, and they'll be outraged.
Yeah.
What are the government and it's like, they told you. They had meetings. You didn't go. You didn't call your county commissioner. You didn't call your school board. You didn't write to your people in Tallahassee. And this is what you got. You know what I'm saying? And so again, everything that we talk about on this podcast, everything that we find ourselves bitching about, A, we play a role in. B, we have a say over to some degree. Now, I mean, are you going to win every battle? No. But in this great war that we're fighting right now, right, with making ourselves quote unquote great.
Listen, what are the main things they tell you when you're starting a diet or you want to get healthy? Set a goal, set a small goal, reach that goal.
Exactly.
Set a small goal and reach that goal. And that's how things get done. And you know me, I pride myself on
you're a task
solving problems. The frustration with me and our government is nobody wants to solve problems. They just want to use them to their advantage, which that's very frustrating to me.
I get that. But again, it's going to go back to what I said probably 10 minutes ago. You're not the only person who's frustrated. The difference becomes, what are you going to do about it? What actionable steps are you going to take to actively seek out change? Do you know what I'm saying? And that to me is the biggest takeaway from the ManTFup podcast. Like, we sit here, we talk about nutrition, and we get mad about what the government allows to be put in our food, right? And then you go, okay, but at the end of the day, knowledge is power, and there's knowledge and access to information everywhere. You make a conscious choice every time you pick up a fork or your fingers or a cup and you choose to put something into your body, right? So where does the accountability come from on an individual basis? When you're getting ready to drive through the McDonald's, drive-through line, or Wendy's or Taco Bell or PD or any of the other or when you're choosing Olive Garden and taking home the extra fettuccine Alfredo. When it comes to our education system, right? You feel like it's falling short, but you don't have the money to put your kid in private school. Are you doing extra reading with your children at home? Are you investing in their personal library? There's free programs where they'll send your kid a book every single month from the age of 3 to 4. The Children's Trust has that in Miami-Dade County. Literally, they said if there's 10,000 kids that are actively, able to participate, they've got 3,000 that are signed up. That's 7,000 parents that are not taking advantage of the opportunity to feed their children's minds for free, right? So it's like, where does the personal accountability start? When we talk about politics and wanting to see change, right? Everybody put their money on Trump, like, oh, drain the swamp. But what did you do beyond voting for him? Did you try to drain the swamp in your state?
And, back to that, I think, we want to put a lot of the onus on parents right now. But I think we're a generation or two almost behind that. Do you know what I mean?
Like because it hasn't been present?
Yes, because,
got you.
You have, again, if you had a grandmother who didn't get involved in their child's education, who raised a child who, dropped out at 16, and then you have that person having a child at 18, and now you're into, it's like now you're perpetuating the problem. So yeah, we can lay a lot of onus on parents and on the school system, but it's almost like you need to almost re-educate some of the general society that's already full grown.
As scary as it sounds like we need a full stop reset.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it is.
But until people can acknowledge that, right, and then can say, you know what, I want to play an active part in this, we're gonna sit on this couch every week and continue to be frustrated or spin the wheels, because it's not gonna get changed by one person. Now, each person, each one teach one, right? So you've got to get out there and actively, I think that this is a part of doing our part, actively seeking change, having these conversations. But until more people kind of jump on the bandwagon, we're going to keep pointing the finger and expecting somebody else to come in. Nobody's coming to save us.
No, I have one more thing to say about the Broward County thing, though. And this is typical of government. So what I suggested was have 2 lower grades before kindergarten. What they're suggesting is making affordable housing. And in their statement, they said, we need 7,000 units
per year.
Year. So let's just say out of those 5 schools, you could build 7,000 units. Okay.
Now, what about next year?
What about
next year? Close 5 more schools?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about educating kids and cleaning up your school system, which is what you're supposed to do, and then having more productive kids coming out of school to make more money to, I mean, it's like, that's not a fix. That's not a fix. It's a Band-Aid. Nobody wants to fix problems in this country. They want to put Band-Aids on them. And, putting a Band-Aid on stuff like that is just not, it's not going to work. And it's going to run out. It's going to implode.
Well, what's scarier is the fact that Broward County is like the 6th largest school district in the country. So if we're experiencing this here, right, and we know what the cost of living has become, especially in Southern Florida, and what's happening in Los Angeles, and we've seen what's going on in New York, right? Like, this is clearly one of those, I don't want to say early warning signs because we've had many. It's not early anymore. But, the smoke signals are going up, ladies and gentlemen,
yes,
and it's time to pay attention.
They're not just smoke signals. They're smoke.
When you start,
there's smoke from the burning down of what's going on
when
around
you start eliminating school, as we're having this battle about education, and you start not investing in and shoring up, but eliminating completely places where our children go to be educated, like, what's that telling you about where the priorities lie? I also didn't realize, I was never thinking about it this way, like, what large landowners our school departments are. I didn't think about it. They said, as one of the largest landowners in Broward County, we're sitting on acreage. And I was like, holy shit. Yeah. Like, you know what I'm saying? And I know somebody's like, what'd you think? Like, there's going to be one of those comments in there if you pull this clip. But it's like, that's just not how we go through life, whether that's intentional right? That they're not talking about these things. But yeah, if you think any of our public hospitals that are publicly funded,
Yeah.
all that land that they're sitting on, those campuses, right? That's, land that or the people, technically we own that.
The airport, same thing. The airport just sold off a bunch of property. So.
But where does that, you know what I mean? And anyway, again, that's a whole other conversation that we could get into. But check out the clip. Again, I would absolutely love to see some of these mobility exercises implemented into our classrooms. If you're a teacher watching and you do something like this with your students, or you try something like this with your students, please tag us in that video so that we can share and repost. That's the beauty of American education. You can do things like this without having to go through a ton of red tape. You might get a couple of pissed off parents
you're gonna
that are
get
like,
parents that are
why are you stressing my child out? And whatever. But I say go for it. What is the saying? Like, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than it is for permission.
Yeah.
But again, please tag us in these videos if you do something like this with your students. And if you have any thoughts or comments or insights, you'd like to be a guest, feel free to email me. Go ahead, Lenny.
Kimmy B at ManTFupTV.com.
And then, of course, like, subscribe, share, and follow. We are absolutely everywhere. You can check out the full video on YouTube, which is probably where you're watching it right now. Also, check out our YouTube Shorts, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. We're on all streaming platforms. And yeah, remember, it starts with you. ManTFup.
Peace.